I think we'll start off first by asking you how you got started in the environmental protection career.
Thank you for having me. In the 1990s, when I worked for the media, I got the chance to travel in different parts of China for all kinds of interviews. And and during the process, I have encountered the environmental damage in different parts of our country. And I gradually focused my attention on the water situation at that time, water shortage, water pollution, and the degradation of freshwater biodiversity. It happened in many parts of China. And I did my research into that and came up with a book titled China's Water Crisis, and published the book in the year 1999, and basically delve into the water challenges in 7 major drainage basins, and then came up with this analysis about different options to tackle the issue.
Okay, so you were a journalist at that time, and do you have any background in environment or any scientific background?
My background is journalism, but during the process, of course, I need to look into all kind of scientific documents. It's just research papers, and I pay attention to the also to the data. At that time, the lack of data was quite obvious, and so that's why when I started, when I founded the organization, Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs (IPE), our first project is to develop a water pollution database across China.
How did you do that? How did you gather a database for the water pollution condition in China?
Yeah, I trust that if we want to tackle the issue, we got to have extensive public participation, because at that time, we copy laws and regulations from the Western countries, but the enforcement remained to be very weak at that time. And the cost of violations was too low. So I decided that we need people to gain the awareness and get involved, not just the people, but also the business, the market. But to do that, people must be informed first. And during my research into my book, and I realized there were major gap in our public access to environmental data. So in 2006, right after we set up this organization, we designed and developed the first public interest environmental database focused first on water pollution, with the gathering collection of the pollution monitoring data, the amount of discharge, and also a list of water polluters, because I trust that if we want to solve the problem, we need to tackle the sources.
How did you present this data to the public, to the general public? And China is such a large country. How do you get them to be excited with your data and get involved?
Yeah, I realized that it's not enough just to have the data in an Excel spreadsheet. We need to visualize that. So that's why we developed a website and name it China's Water Pollution Map. Because I trust that the mapping technology can help visualize, can help people understand, where are this pollution, and how severe they are, and what are the sources, and also how close they were to their home. So So we developed a map and gradually put all this on the digital map. Of course, at the very beginning, the data was very, very limited. The first year, I still remember. In the first year, with three of us full time, and along with half a dozen volunteers, we managed to find only less than 2,000 records of violations. With in a country like China, with hundreds of thousands of major emitters, that was very, very limited. But we still decided to present that first, and this instantly got the attention from the media, because with the gathering of the data of these records of violations for the first time, some of the top brands have been identified having wouldn't be able to comply with the basic discharge standards. So one by one, they started bow to the public pressure and started openly address the issue. But still, the data was very limited, and we decided to develop an index with our partner, NRDC, and developed a transparency index called PITI, Pollution Information Transparency Index, and used that to assess the performance of 120 cities across China, major cities. And we did that for 10 years of time. And year on year, and through all this advocacy and we gradually see a real progress made in China. And so today, that records of violation have been over 2.1 million, and with many of the much of the data or of the air quality, water quality being made automated, the monitoring, and even the emission sources, the monitoring have been made automated. We got about 4 million pieces of monitoring data every day.
Excellent. How did you get the manpower and the funding to do your project? Are these public domain data, or you had to go gather it yourself from the local measurements?
In China, data could be very sensitive, especially at the beginning of our work back in 16 years ago. It was very sensitive, and so we decided that we will first use government source the data in our database. So what we did is to motivate them, the government, to agencies, to disclose all the monitoring they have been doing. Of course, it sounds beautiful, but as I said, their public transparency, their transparency level was limited. So with the index means to target that, and so gradually the Chinese government agencies have done more monitoring than most of the developing countries, I would say. But for many years, the data was not made fully transparent. So with all this public demand and advocacy, and gradually the government started giving out the data more to the public. And in the year 2015, so through the 4 years of a long process of amendment, the Chinese environmental protection law for the first time created a special chapter titled Environmental Transparency and Public Participation. And we gained a solid legal basis for all this government data to be disclosed. So that was the first step, and with that, China made a historic progress. And then the second source of the data was the self-disclosure monitoring and disclosure made by the corporations. For a long time, the corporate wouldn't disclose those data, but in the year 2014, another milestone was set up when China became the world's first country to require major emitters to give their online monitoring data at real time. Today, some tens of thousands of major emitters must give their online monitoring to the public every 1 hour or every 2 hours. So what we did is to, we advocate this to happen when the data was made available on nearly 30 different provincial platforms. What we did is to create a cell phone app called the Blue Map app and compile all this data into a single searchable platform, online mobile platform, and help people to visualize. Those who are in the color and those who fail to comply will be turned into color red. And with that, our users can easily identify them and share those information, those records on the social media. And that was quite helpful. And we see thousands of the major emitters, including the coal power, iron, steel, cement, and chemical and petrochemical companies openly address their violations to the public for the first time.
You make it sound easy, but I'm sure it was not, dealing with the government and create the general public's interest in this matter. How do you do that?
Yeah, 16 years. I wouldn't say it's easy, but I think it was still easier than when I did my research into the book, and then after that, joined some of the other NGOs' efforts to try to tackle the issue. We knocked the door and they wouldn't open. The polluters, and we called them. They hung up our phone call, and we wrote to them, no response, and basically we were powerless. And in China, our situation is at that time it was very difficult or extremely difficult to try to file any legal lawsuit, and or we openly protest. That was very, very difficult. So we did not have many other options, but with the transparency, with the disclosure, it helped us to eventually build the trust and bridge the gap of distrust, and finally pressure all these emitters to come to the terms with the public, to openly engage with the NGOs and the public and to solve their problem. One of the leverage we find is to go through the major brands, started with the multinational brands who source heavily, massively in China. China is the factory of the world for over the past 20 years. And while we export all these products, the damage, all this pollution got left in our backyards, contaminating the air, water, and soil and coastal seas. So when I engage with the brands at the beginning, more than 10 years ago, they kind of say, in China, I did not know who are polluting and who are not. So we can only buy from the cheapest. But then I handed them with the list. So basically comparing their list of suppliers with our list of violators, they can easily spot the gaps, and they can take their action. So I'm happy to see one by one this brand started integrating this into their sourcing code, and started using their sourcing power to motivate change. So far, more than 16,000 suppliers have come to us through our website, through our app platform, openly motivate their brands, their suppliers to openly address violations and make disclosure.
When you're exposed to polluters, have you ever been threatened or got some political pressure on that front?
Yeah, at the beginning, it was a little bit more, there were more tension and, of course, threatening tones or some of the pressure building up. Our young team at that time faced a lot of pressure. And also sometimes, if they approach us directly, we still have ways to deal with that situation. But sometimes they went to their contact within the local government or other agencies, and that was even more difficult for us. And for 3-4 years, we were in at the beginning a very difficult situation, and we were not quite certain that we can. In some cases, we could still operate, the next day. But still, at the end of the day, what helped us is that all the data we created have a link back in the government document. We have that original sources, and so all this threat and some of the threat of litigation didn't materialize because this is all based on sources, official sources, and or public petition records confirmed by the agencies. So eventually, we also created a path towards solution. I used to, after I work after my my time at the media, I coming back from Yale Wood Fellow, I joined before that I joined an environmental consulting firm, and so I integrate all this process of mitigation and disclosure, third-party audit into our process. So there's a path towards solution. Gradually the emitters find it that it's actually probably easier to try to make disclosure and sometimes go through the third-party audit under supervision of local NGOs or local residents to try to solve the problem, to address the problem. So I'm happy to see that so far, there was a growing consensus built in China that disclosure gradually had been made into a norm. I mentioned about the historic progress made in government transparency, environmental transparency, and in a few days, on February the coming February the 8th, the first mandatory disclosure bylaw, corporate mandatory disclosure bylaw will come into effect just in 12 days of time. So so I'm very happy to see that this is going to be very, very helpful. This time the corporations will be required not just to disclose their violations and mitigation, but also the volume of discharge, and for the first time, their carbon footprint.
Okay. What was the role of technology in your fight?
Yeah, technology has played an extremely important role. As I mentioned, we started with only 3 person. You can imagine creating a national database with just or a national level campaign, with just 3 full-time. That was our challenge. And but luckily, at that time, China leapfrogged into the information age. So we can tap into the power of the internet, and then the website and then gradually, cloud computing and big data, and now more increasingly from AI technologies and 5G and Internet of Things and blockchain. So one by one, all these technologies has been extremely helpful. You can imagine, now every day, we need to process some 4 million pieces of environmental data, and all this coming from 5,000 different sources in very different format and categories. How to process that? It was not quite likely to process them manually. So we have to turn to AI and other technologies to help with that.
Yeah, so if you build a huge alliance in your fight, it seems, and I have to congratulate you on that. So if you want to leave a few words for the next generation of environmentalists who might do this work in other countries, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I hope that we can all recognize that that today how serious our challenge is. On the on the pollution side, on the resource biodiversity side, on the ocean side, and of course on the climate side. So all this magnitude and complexities means that we have to find innovative solutions. And today we're facing a globalized economy and globalized situation, and how to connect all these missing dots together. I trust that data transparency, all this information technology can play a major role in this. And of course, today we're mainly focused on China, but gradually we understand our responsibility, our impact, and also some of the solutions developed here can be used in other parts of the world. So we're eager to find partners in other parts of the world, and I trust that together, by tapping into the technology and with all the environmental transparency and multi-stakeholder engagement, we can build back better together.
Excellent. Well, Junma, thank you so much for coming on this interview. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. And that was Junma, Director of the IPE China. Please stay tuned for next interview of the PMAC